The records from Arizona Territory in November of 1876 tell 1,000 stories of gold and blood and broken promises. But there is one story that was nearly erased from history entirely. It began not with a gunshot, but with a sale. A woman bound and hooded, sold for less than the price of a good meal. The crowd laughed, the seller smirked. But the man who bought her, a rugged mountain hermit named Jonah Blackwood, did not know he had just purchased the most dangerous truth in the West. When that burlap sack finally came off and she spoke her first words, the silence of those ancient mountains would shatter forever. This is not just a rescue story. This is a confession of courage that changed the frontier. The mud of Prescott was thick enough to pull the boots off a man, but that did not stop the crowd from gathering outside the makeshift auction platform on a freezing Tuesday morning. The air smelled of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of raw desperation that clung to every border town like a second skin. Jonah Blackwood stood at the edge of that circle of jeering faces, a shadow against the gray November sky. He was a mountain man in the truest sense of the word, 6 feet 2 inches of weathered muscle and silence. His beard was thick and brown, shot through with silver, grown wild over 9 long years of solitude. A scar in the shape of a cross marked his right cheek, a reminder of a knife fight he barely survived back when he still cared about surviving. His eyes were gray as winter stone, the kind of eyes that had stared into the sun too long and seen too much darkness. Down from the heights of Devil's Spine he had come, from that treacherous range of peaks where the pines grew twisted and the wind howled warnings to any man foolish enough to trespass. His purpose was simple: trade beaver pelts for salt, coffee, and ammunition. Nothing more. Lingering in this cesspool of humanity held no appeal for a man who had learned to prefer the company of silence. The town of Prescott, teeming with miners and drifters and men who would sell their own mothers for a nugget of silver, made his skin crawl. But the commotion near the livery stable halted him in his tracks like a hand grabbing his collar. "Step right up, you sorry lot. Feast your eyes on the merchandise." The voice belonged to a man known only as Pike Sutter, a slavering opportunist with a reputation for selling things that did not belong to him. Horses with forged papers, watches stolen from dead men's wrists, and today it seemed a human being. Jonah shifted the weight of his Sharps rifle, feeling his familiar heft against his shoulder like an old friend. He peered over the heads of the shouting miners and saw her. In the center of that mud pit, tethered to a hitching post like livestock, stood a woman. She was slight, shivering violently in a dress that was little more than filthy rags hanging from her shoulders. Her hands were bound with rough hemp rope that had already cut deep red lines into her wrists. But the most disturbing detail, the image that would burn itself into Jonah's mind for the rest of his days, was the burlap sack tied securely over her head. It obscured her face completely, turning her identity into a void, a question mark, a thing rather than a person. "What is wrong with her, Sutter?" a miner shouted from the crowd, spitting a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "She got the pox? Why the hood?" Pike laughed, a wet rattling sound like gravel shaking in a tin can. "Ain't no pox, boys. She is just ugly as mortal sin, a face that would curdle fresh milk and turn bread to stone. But she is strong as an ox, cooks, cleans, and don't talk back much. I will let her go cheap, seeing as how charitable I am feeling today. Do I hear $5? The crowd murmured, but no one raised a hand. $5 could buy a week of hot meals or a night at the saloon with enough left over for a bottle of whiskey. No one wanted a woman they could not see, especially one described as a monster lurking under burlap. $3, Pike cried, his desperation beginning to show like cracks in old leather. He yanked the rope hard, causing the woman to stumble forward into the muck. She made no sound. She did not cry out or beg. She simply fell to her knees and struggled to rise again, her breathing ragged and labored beneath that terrible hood. Jonah felt something cold and sharp rise in his chest. It was not the chivalry of some storybook knight. It was the disgust of a man who had spent too many years alone in the wilderness, learning to respect the natural order of things. He hated to see anything, animal or human, trapped and humiliated without cause. $2, Pike was shouting now, his voice cracking. "Come on, fellas. She has got good teeth, I reckon." "Probably." He kicked dirt at her, and she flinched but did not fall again. The cruelty was casual, standard fare for the territory, but today it struck a nerve deep in Jonah Blackwood's chest. He remembered the solitude of his cabin, perched high on that windswept ridge. He remembered the silence that sometimes felt like a heavy wool blanket smothering him slowly. He looked at the woman again, really looked at her. There was a dignity in her silence that stirred something long dormant inside him. She was not begging, she was not weeping, she was enduring. $1, Jonah said. His voice was low and rough like two stones grinding together, but it cut through the chatter of the crowd like a blade through soft butter. The miners turned to look at him. Most of them gave him a wide berth. Jonah Blackwood was known in these parts, though few had seen him up close in years. They called him the Mountain Ghost, a man who could shoot the eye out of a hawk at 700 yards, a man who had walked away from civilization and never looked back. Pike Sutter squinted at him, trying to read his intentions and failing. $1 for a whole woman? That is robbery, mountain man. That is an insult to honest commerce. She is hooded, and you claim she is ugly, Jonah replied, his tone flat and unreadable. He fished a single heavy silver dollar from the leather pouch at his belt. It was a coin he had earned trapping in the bitter cold, breaking ice to set his lines, living on jerky and melted snow. He flipped the coin into the air where it caught the pale sunlight and flashed like a tiny promise. Take it or I leave and she freezes to death on that post. No one else is buying, Sutter. You know it, and I know it. Pike caught the coin with a greedy snap of his hand and bit down on it to check its authenticity, his yellowed teeth scraping silver. Sold, he declared with a grin that showed too many gaps. Sold to the hermit of Devil's Spine. Good luck with the beast, Blackwood. Do not say I did not warn you about that face. The crowd dispersed quickly, disappointed there had not been more spectacle. Jonah walked up to the hitching post with slow, deliberate steps. Up close, the woman smelled of stale hay and fear and something else, something he could not name. Dried blood, perhaps. Despair. He pulled his hunting knife from his belt, and she flinched violently, her whole body tensing for a blow that never came. Stand still, Jonah said quietly. With one swift motion, he cut the rope binding her to the post. Then he severed the cords around her wrists. Her hands were raw and bleeding where the hemp had dug in like teeth. He did not remove the sack. Not here. Not with 100 prying eyes watching from saloon windows and alleyways. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded once, a jerky, terrified motion that spoke of confusion and distrust. Then walk, he said simply. We have a long climb before sundown. He threw his spare buffalo robe over her shivering shoulders. She clutched it instantly, burying herself in the thick fur as if it were the first kindness she had known in months. Jonah turned his back on civilization, such as it was, and began the long trek toward the mountains. The woman trailed 5 paces behind him, a faceless ghost wrapped in fur, following a stranger into the unknown. The journey up to the high ridge they called Devil's Spine was treacherous even for a man unburdened by injury or fear. For a woman who had likely not eaten a proper meal in days, it should have been impossible. The snow began to fall in earnest as they passed the tree line, thick, heavy flakes that erased their footprints within seconds. Jonah kept a steady pace, his boots crunching through the icy crust, but his ears were always tuned to the sound of footsteps behind him. He expected her to collapse. He expected her to beg for rest or water or mercy. But for 3 solid hours, the only sounds were her labored breathing and the scrape of her boots on frozen stone. They reached a narrow pass where the wind howled like a living thing, whipping ice crystals into their faces hard enough to draw blood. Jonah stopped and turned. The woman was struggling now, slipping on a patch of black ice. She fell hard onto her hip with a muffled cry that she tried to swallow. Jonah sighed, his breath rising in a white plume. He walked back and extended a gloved hand. She hesitated, and he could sense her calculating through that burlap hood, wondering if his hand was a trap or a lifeline. Finally, she took it. Her grip was surprisingly firm, her fingers long and slender beneath the grime and dried blood. We are almost there, he shouted over the roar of the wind. Do not quit on me now. He did not let go of her hand for the rest of the climb. He practically dragged her up the final brutal incline, his boots digging into the frozen earth with every step, his muscles burning. When they finally crested the ridge, his cabin appeared before them like a blessing. It was a sturdy structure of rough-hewn logs backed against a sheer cliff face that protected it from the worst of the avalanches. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but the fire had long since died. He kicked the heavy door open and ushered her inside into darkness and the smell of pine resin and cured leather. Jonah moved quickly, striking a match to light the kerosene lamp that hung from a beam. The warm golden glow spread slowly across the single room. He stoked the embers in the cast-iron stove, adding kindling and logs until the fire roared back to life, casting dancing shadows against the rough timber walls. As warmth began to seep into the frozen air, Jonah turned to face his guest. She was standing by the door, still huddled in the buffalo robe, looking for all the world like a statue carved from misery and suspicion. "You are safe here," Jonah said, removing his heavy coat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "No one comes up to the spine unless they want to die of cold or stupidity." He pointed to a wooden chair near the fire. "Sit." She obeyed, moving stiffly as if every joint ached. Jonah retrieved a tin cup from a shelf, filled it with water from a wooden bucket, and held it out to her. "Drink." She took the cup carefully, lifting it under the edge of the burlap sack to sip. Her hands were shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim and dripped onto the floor. Jonah watched her for a moment, then spoke again, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "All right," he said. "Sutter is gone. The town is miles away and buried in snow. You can take that thing off your head now." The woman froze. She set the cup down on the floor with exaggerated care. Her bound hands went to her lap, fingers lacing together tightly. She shook her head in a sharp, desperate motion. "No," Jonah frowned, confused. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, trying to make his voice sound less like gravel and more like reassurance. "But I cannot have a guest I cannot look in the eye. Take it off." She shook her head again, more vigorously this time, and retreated deeper into the chair as if trying to disappear into the wood itself. "Sutter said you were ugly," Jonah said, his voice softening a fraction more as understanding began to dawn. "I have skinned bears and fought wolves and seen men torn apart by their own greed. I do not care what you look like. But you cannot eat right or breathe properly in that sack." When she still refused, trembling now with some emotion he could not name, Jonah took a slow step forward. He moved deliberately, telegraphing every action so she would not be startled. "I'm going to cut it off," he said. "Hold still." She whimpered, the first real sound she had made since the auction. It was a high, pitiful sound that made something twist painfully in Jonah's chest. But she did not run. She seemed resigned to whatever fate awaited her under that burlap hood. Jonah reached out with his knife, carefully sliding the blade under the twine knotted at her neck. He could see her pulse hammering there like a trapped bird. With a quick flick of his wrist, the twine snapped. He pinched the top of the burlap sack and lifted it away. The rough fabric slid free with a whisper, and Jonah found himself bracing for scars or disease or deformity. What he saw instead made him drop the sack to the floor. She was not ugly, not even close. Even with dirt smudged across her high cheekbones and a dark bruise blooming along her jawline, her features were striking in a way that had nothing to do with softness or delicacy. Her face was angular, fierce, carved by sun and wind into something wild and beautiful. Her eyes were the color of dark amber, sharp and bright with intelligence and a carefully banked rage. Her hair, matted and tangled, was black as a raven's wing and fell past her shoulders. There was a thin scar across her left eyebrow, another along her collarbone visible above the torn neckline of her dress. These were not the scars of clumsiness. These were the marks of someone who had fought and survived. She looked up at him with those burning eyes, waiting for his reaction, braced for disgust or worse. "Who are you?" Jonah whispered. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. She touched her throat gingerly, as if speaking were a skill she had forgotten. "Can you speak?" Jonah asked. She nodded. She took a deep, shuddering breath that made her whole body tremble. When she finally spoke, the voice that emerged was not the broken rasp of some frontier prostitute or the timid squeak of a farm girl. It was clear and measured and carried an accent that Jonah recognized immediately from his years in the army. The careful, precise English of someone who had learned the language later in life. Someone who spoke it like a second skin she had put on over her true self. "My name," she said, her voice cracking from disuse but growing stronger with each syllable, "is Ayanna. And if they know I am here, They will kill us both. For a long moment, the only sound in the cabin was the crackle of pine logs burning in the stove. Jonah studied her with the same careful attention he gave to tracking prey through snow. He had paid $1 for a stranger to help him through the winter, perhaps out of pity or perhaps out of some instinct he did not fully understand. Instead, he had bought himself a walking death sentence wrapped in secrets and danger. "Who are they?" Jonah asked quietly, moving to the window to peer out into the darkness that was rapidly swallowing the mountains, half expecting to see torches winding up the narrow trail like angry fireflies. Ayana pulled the buffalo robe tighter around her shoulders, and for the first time since the sack had come off, Jonah saw fear flicker across her face. "The men who killed my father," she said. Her voice steady now, but laced with pain so deep it seemed to come from her bones. "The men who paid that Phil Sutter to humiliate me and sell me off to a stranger rather than kill me quickly and risk questions." Jonah turned back from the window, his jaw tight. "Why did they not just kill you?" he asked bluntly. "Because," Ayana said, and her voice took on a razor edge that made Jonah respect her even more. "I am the only one who knows the truth about what they did, the only witness to murder." Jonah narrowed his eyes. "Your father, who was he?" She met his gaze without flinching. "My father was Chief Mongoose of the Chiricahua Apache. Does that name mean anything to you, mountain man?" It did. Jonah felt something cold settle in his gut. He had heard of Chief Mongoose, a leader known for trying to broker peace between his people and the flood of settlers pouring into the territory like locusts. A man respected even by his enemies for his wisdom and restraint. The army newspapers had reported his death 2 months ago. A tragic accident, they said. A fall from his horse during a storm. "I heard he died in an accident," Jonah said carefully, watching her face. "A bullet is not an accident," Ayana replied bitterly, her hands clenching into fists in her lap. "They shot him in front of me. 6 men, at night, while he slept in his own home." "Who?" Jonah asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "A man named Clayton Harrow," she said, and the name fell into the room like a stone into still water, sending ripples of recognition and dread through Jonah's mind. Jonah exhaled slowly. Clayton Harrow was a name that carried weight in Arizona territory. He was the kind of man who wore expensive suits and smiled with too many teeth. A land speculator who had grown rich by finding legal loopholes and exploiting them without mercy. Some said he owned half the judges between here and Santa Fe. If Harrow wanted someone dead, they usually ended up that way, and no one asked questions. "Harrow is a powerful enemy," Jonah said quietly, almost to himself. "So you know who he is." Ayana's voice was sharp now, cutting. "Then you know why I was sold like an animal instead of buried in an unmarked grave. Harrow needed me silenced. But if I died mysteriously, the army might investigate. If I vanished into slavery, no one would care. Another Apache woman swallowed by the frontier. A tragedy. A footnote." Jonah sat down heavily in the chair across from her, the weight of this new knowledge pressing on his shoulders like an iron yoke. "What did your father do to earn a bullet?" Ayana looked into the fire, and for a moment, her face was illuminated by the orange glow, all sharp angles and shadows. "He refused to sign a treaty," she said. "Harrow came to our land with papers. He said it was a simple agreement. Supplies and protection in exchange for access to a portion of our territory for a railroad route. But my father could read English. The missionary, Father Santos, taught us. The treaty was a lie. It was a deed, a transfer of ownership. Harrow wanted our sacred land because there is silver beneath it, a mine worth more money than most men will see in 10 lifetimes. Jonah whistled low. "That is a hell of a motive for murder." Ayana nodded. "My father refused to sign. That night, Harrow returned with the armed men. I was hiding in the next room. I heard everything. Harrow told my father that he had 2 choices. Sign the deed or die and let his people be driven off the land anyway. My father chose to die with honor. So they shot him, and they would have shot me too, but I ran. I hid in the sacred caves for 3 weeks, eating roots and drinking rainwater, until Harrow's hunters found me." "Why did they not kill you then?" Jonah asked. Ayana's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "Because Harrow is smart. He realized that if I died, I might become a martyr. My people would rally. The army might ask uncomfortable questions. But if I was broken first, humiliated, turned into nothing, then my testimony would be worthless. A broken woman cannot inspire a rebellion. Jonah felt anger rising in him, hot and clean, the kind of anger he had not felt in 9 years. It burned away some of the cold numbness that had settled into his heart the day his wife Mary died. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "I could turn you over to Harrow. There is probably a reward, probably a fat one." Ayanna looked him dead in the eyes, and the fear was gone now, replaced by a steel resolve that impressed even a man as hardened as Jonah Blackwood. "Because you paid for me when I was worthless," she said simply. "You cut my ropes without asking for anything in return. And because I saw your eyes when you looked at Sutter. You hate men like that more than you love money." Jonah grunted. She was right, and they both knew it. But rightness did not make the situation any less dangerous. "We have a problem, Ayanna," he said, walking to the rough-hewn table in the center of the room and pouring himself a shot of whiskey from a clay jug. "Sutter is a loudmouth and a drunk. He will spend that dollar on rotgut within an hour. Then he will start bragging about the man who bought the ugly Apache woman. If Harrow has men in town, and I am betting he does, they will hear about it. They will ask, 'Who bought you?' Sutter will point them straight to Devil's Spine." "Then I should leave," Ayanna said, standing up abruptly. "I will not bring your death to your door. You saved me. That is enough." "Sit down," Jonah barked, his voice sharp enough to cut. She froze, startled. "You would not make it 10 yards in this snow," he continued, his tone softening just slightly. "Besides," and he picked up his Sharps rifle and began to wipe it down with an oily rag, his movements practiced and automatic. "I have not had a good fight in a long time, and I never did like land thieves." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a victim, but a survivor. Someone who had endured horrors and come out the other side with her spine still straight and her eyes still burning. "But if we are going to survive this," he said, "you need to stop being a victim and start being a fighter." "Can you shoot?" Ayanna shook her head. "I can speak 2 languages, track a deer through rock, and treat wounds with herbs," she said. "I have never held a gun." Jonah pulled a heavy Colt revolver from his belt and set it on the table with a solid thud that echoed in the small space. "Lesson 1 starts tomorrow at dawn," he said, "because come morning the wolves will be at the door. And these wolves walk on 2 legs. The wind outside battered the cabin, screaming through the pines like a warning from the mountain itself." Jonah knew with a sinking certainty in his gut that down in Prescott, the gears of violence were already turning. Sutter would talk. Harrow's men would ride. They were alone on this mountain, just a man haunted by his past and a woman carrying a dangerous truth. "Get some sleep," Jonah said, extinguishing the lamp with a twist of the brass knob. The room plunged into firelit darkness. "I will take the first watch." Ayanna curled up in the chair, still clutching the buffalo robe, her eyes closing reluctantly as exhaustion finally claimed her. Jonah sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, staring out into the white darkness of the mountain night. He knew with the grim certainty of a man who had seen too much death that the dollar he spent today was just the down payment. The real price was about to be paid in blood and fire and choices that could not be undone. But as he sat there in the cold watching over this stranger who had somehow become his responsibility, Jonah Blackwood felt something he had not felt in 9 long years. He felt awake, he felt alive. And for the first time since Mary died, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth fighting for in this broken world. The dawn broke not with sunlight, but with the crack of a rifle shot. The bullet shattered the upper corner of the window, sending a spray of glass shards spinning through the air like tiny daggers. They scattered across the wooden floorboards with a sound like rain on a tin roof. Ayanna screamed and dropped to the floor exactly as Jonah had instructed her the night before during their hasty lesson in survival. Jonah did not flinch. He was already moving, sliding across the floor on his belly toward the corner of the cabin where the shadows were deepest and the angles gave him the best line of sight. "Stay down," he hissed through clenched teeth, "and do not touch that Colt unless they come through the door." He pressed his eye to a narrow gap in the logs, a carefully carved spy hole he had made years ago for exactly this kind of situation. Outside, the white landscape stretched away in deceptive peace. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in a pristine blanket that sparkled in the pale morning light. But Jonah's trained eyes saw what others would miss: the unnatural shape of a snowdrift to the east, the glint of metal near the tree line, the faint impression of boot prints leading up from the trail. Three of them, Jonah muttered under his breath, his mind already calculating angles and distances. Maybe four. They made good time. Damn good time. Is it Sutter? Ayanna asked from her position on the floor, her voice trembling, but her hands steady as she gripped the heavy Colt revolver he had given her. Sutter does not have the spine for a dawn raid, Jonah replied, chambering around into his Sharps rifle with a smooth practice motion that spoke of decades of use. These are professionals, Harrow's hired guns, men who kill for money and sleep just fine afterward. Another shot rang out, the sound echoing off the cliff face behind the cabin. This one thumped harmlessly into the thick oak logs of the wall, burying itself in wood that had been chosen specifically for its ability to stop bullets. The cabin was a fortress, small and crude, but built by a man who understood that enemies could come from anywhere. Blackwood, a voice boomed from the tree line, carried on the cold morning air. It was deep and commanding, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. Send the girl out. We know she is in there. Give her up and you can keep your dollar and your miserable life. Hell, we will even throw in $100 in gold. Just walk away and let us handle our business. Jonah recognized the voice, and it made his blood run even colder. Garrett Lynch, a former cavalry sergeant who had been dishonorably discharged for excessive brutality during the Apache campaigns. A man who had once bragged about how many women and children he had killed, as if it were a competition. He was exactly the kind of monster that Clayton Harrow would hire for this kind of work. Jonah looked at Ayanna, who was pale but composed, clutching the buffalo robe with one hand and the gun with the other. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, an entire conversation passed between them without words. Well, Jonah asked quietly, his face unreadable. $100 in gold is a lot of money for a mountain man who lives on jerky and solitude. Ayanna's eyes hardened into something fierce and unbreakable. She reached over with her free hand and cocked the hammer of the Colt. The metallic click was loud in the tense silence of the cabin. If you send me out there, she said, her voice steady as bedrock, I will shoot you first. Then I will save the last bullet for myself. I will not let them take me alive. I will not let them break me. A slow, rare grin spread across Jonah's bearded face. It was the kind of grin a man wore when he recognized a kindred spirit. Someone who understood that some things were worth dying for. Good answer, he said. He turned back to the wall and raised his voice so it would carry out into the cold morning. Lynch, he called out, you are trespassing on private land. Turn around and ride back to whatever hole Harrow keeps you in, or I will bury you where you stand. The answer was a volley of gunfire. 4 rifles opened up at once, the sound rolling across the mountain like thunder. Bullets chewed into the wood, filling the air inside the cabin with splinters and the smell of gunpowder. Ayanna covered her head with her arms, and Jonah pressed himself flat against the wall, counting the shots. Waiting, listening. He knew the rhythm of a Winchester repeater. Each rifle held 15 rounds. They were firing in staggered bursts to keep him pinned down. 1, 2, 3, pause to reload. In that brief pause, Jonah moved like a striking snake. He stood up, thrust the barrel of his Sharps through the broken window, sighted on the unnatural snowdrift, saw Sharps to the east, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared like a cannon, the recoil slamming into Jonah's shoulder with familiar violence. Downrange, a man screamed. He thrashed out of his snowblind, clutching his left shoulder where Jonah's bullet had punched clean through muscle and bone. Blood sprayed bright red against white snow, and the man collapsed, writhing and cursing. One down, Jonah grunted with grim satisfaction. He dropped back below the window line, just as return fire shredded the wooden frame, sending more splinters flying. They are going to rush us, Jonah said, crawling over to the trap door hidden beneath a bearskin rug in the center of the floor. They will try to burn us out or starve us out, and we cannot stay here. Where do we go? Ayanna asked, coughing as smoke began to seep into the room from somewhere outside. Jonah could smell kerosene. They were already preparing the fire. The root cellar has a tunnel, he explained quickly, his hands moving to throw the rug aside and reveal the heavy wooden trapdoor beneath. It was built as an escape route in case of bears, or worse. It comes out behind the waterfall 200 yards down the ridge. It is tight, it is wet, and it is freezing cold. But it is our only chance. Move. Now, Ayanna did not hesitate. She scrambled towards the trap door, clutching the Colt in one hand and her torn skirts in the other. Jonah grabbed a canvas pouch of ammunition, a bag of dried meat, and his hunting knife. He took one last look around his cabin, the only home he had known for 9 years, the only place where he had found any kind of peace after Mary died. And then, with a deliberate motion that felt like a small death, he grabbed the kerosene lamp and hurled it into the corner where his pile of furs and blankets lay stacked. Why? Ayanna gasped from the ladder leading down into darkness. If they think we died in the fire, Jonah said grimly, they will not look for tracks in the snow. They will assume we burned. It buys us time. He descended into the trap door, pulling it shut above them just as flames began to lick hungrily at the walls of the cabin he had built with his own hands. The tunnel was every bit the nightmare Jonah had warned about. It smelled of damp earth and rot and something older, something that lived in the ground and did not like being disturbed. Ayanna crawled on her hands and knees through the narrow passage, the jagged rocks tearing at her dress and scraping her palms raw. Behind her, Jonah's bulk barely fit through the space he had dug years ago as insurance against disaster. His breathing was harsh and labored in the confined darkness. They crawled for what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes. The tunnel angled downward, and soon they could hear the roar of water growing louder. Finally, they emerged into the blinding brightness of morning light, filtered through the mist of Clearwater Falls. The waterfall thundered down from the cliff above, its spray instantly soaking them both to the bone. Above and behind them, a column of black smoke rose into the pale sky. Jonah's cabin was burning. They will watch the fire for an hour at least, Jonah said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the falls. That gives us an hour's head start, maybe two if we are lucky. To where? Ayanna asked, shivering violently as the icy spray soaked through the buffalo robe. Jonah looked out at the vast wilderness stretching below them, miles and miles of pine forest and red rock canyons in endless sky. Prescott is a trap, he said, thinking aloud. Harrow owns that town. Fort Whipple is 3 days' walk, and we have no horses. We need help. We need someone we can trust. He turned to look at her, and she saw something shift in his gray eyes, some decision being made. I know a man, he said, Samuel Walker. Used to be an Army colonel. They call him Red Skywalker now. He lives on the outskirts of Prescott. If anyone can help us, it is him. Can you trust him? Ayanna asked. Jonah was silent for a long moment, staring at the smoke rising from his destroyed home. 9 years ago, he saved my life when I did not want it saved, Jonah said quietly. I owe him. And more than that, he is one of the few white men I have ever met who actually gives a damn about what is right instead of what is profitable. They began to descend the ridge, moving as quickly as the terrain and Ayanna's exhaustion would allow. Behind them, the smoke from the burning cabin rose like a funeral pyre, marking the end of one chapter and the violent beginning of another. The trek down from Devil's Spine through the pine forests and Red Rock canyons took 2 grueling days. They moved like ghosts through the wilderness, avoiding the main trails where Harrow's men might be watching. Jonah taught Ayanna how to walk so her footprints left minimal trace in the snow, how to eat pine nuts and drink melted snow without lowering her core temperature dangerously, and how to listen to the forest. The woods spoke in languages most men never learned. The sudden silence of birds meant predators nearby, human or animal. The crack of a branch could be wind, or it could be a rifle stock hitting stone. Ayanna proved herself a quick study, but more than that, she proved she already knew things that Jonah had spent decades learning. She could read animal tracks like words on a page. She knew which plants could be eaten and which would kill. She moved through the undergrowth with a silence that made Jonah, for all his mountain skills, feel clumsy as a bear. On the first night, they sheltered in a shallow cave barely deep enough to protect them from the wind. Jonah built a tiny fire, smokeless and nearly invisible, using a technique he had learned from Apache scouts during his Army days. The irony was not lost on him. Now he was protecting an Apache woman using skills her own people had taught him. They sat close to the flames, not touching, but near enough to share warmth. The silence between them had become comfortable, the kind of quiet that exists between people who have already survived something terrible together. Why did you leave the Army? Ayanna asked suddenly, her voice soft but clear in the darkness. Jonah stared into the fire for a long time before answering. The flames cast shadows across his scarred face, making him look older than his 44 years. When I was 28, he began slowly, as if each word cost him something. I was a scout for the cavalry. My job was to track Apache raiding parties and lead soldiers to their camps. I was good at it. Too good. They gave me medals and promotions and told me I was serving civilization. He paused, his jaw working as if chewing on something bitter. One winter, 1872, I tracked a group to Skeleton Canyon. I reported their position. The next morning, the cavalry attacked. I thought it was a warrior camp. I thought we were engaging combatants. Ayanna went very still beside him, and Jonah could feel the temperature between them drop several degrees. When we rode in after the shooting stopped, he continued, his voice hollow now, devoid of emotion because emotion would break him. I saw what we had done. Women, children, old men, not warriors, families. There was a woman there, maybe 30 years old, holding a baby. Both dead, shot in the back while running. The commanding officer said it was necessary, said they were all hostiles, said I had done my duty. Ayanna's breathing had changed. It was faster now, shallower. That was my mother's sister, she said quietly, each word dropping like a stone into still water. I was there. I was 7 years old. I hid in a juniper bush and watched the yellow-legged soldiers kill my family. I watched until my aunt stopped screaming. Jonah turned to look at her, and for the first time since Mary died, he felt tears burning behind his eyes. He did not let them fall. I am sorry, he said, and the words were completely inadequate, laughably small compared to the magnitude of the crime he was confessing. I did not know. I did not think to question. I just followed orders like a good soldier. Ayanna was silent for a long time. The fire crackled between them. Finally she spoke, and her voice was strange, neither forgiving nor condemning. You did not pull the trigger. Those are triggers, she said. You just watched, like a coward. The words hit Jonah harder than any bullet. He nodded slowly. You are right, he said. I was a coward. I told myself I was just following orders, that I could not change anything. I told myself a lot of lies. And then I went home and found my wife dying of fever because I had been gone too long, chasing ghosts in the desert. That is when I realized the real cowards are the ones who do nothing when they see wrong being done. So I walked away from all of it. The army, the settlements, everything. I went up that mountain to die slowly because I did not have the courage to die quickly. Why did you come down? Ayanna asked. Why buy me? Why risk everything for a stranger? Jonah looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just a woman, but a survivor, a fighter, someone who carried the same scars he did, but wore them differently. Because 9 years of dying slowly is enough, he said. Because when I saw you on that auction block, I saw a chance to stop being a coward. Maybe that is selfish. Maybe I am just trying to save myself by saving you. But it is the truth. Ayanna reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. Her palm was rough with calluses, warm from the fire. You are saving yourself by doing what is right, she said. That is not selfish. That is courage. They sat like that for a long time, hands touching, two broken people finding something like forgiveness in the wilderness darkness. Finally, Ayanna spoke again, and there was the smallest hint of humor in her voice. Your people say Apache women are savage, she said, but we do not make war on children and call it duty. We do not sell human beings and call it commerce. Perhaps you should rethink who the savages are. Jonah laughed, a short bark of surprise sound. You are not wrong, he said. You are not wrong at all. The second day brought them within sight of Prescott's outlying homesteads. They moved carefully now, using every bit of cover the land offered. Red Skywalker's cabin sat on a small rise about a mile from town, far enough to be private but close enough to watch what happened in the streets below. It was a sturdy structure with a stone chimney and a well-maintained corral. Smoke rose from the chimney, a good sign that someone was home. Jonah motioned for Ayanna to wait in a stand of cottonwood trees while he approached. She shook her head. If he betrays you, she said simply, I want to know immediately so I can run. We go together. Jonah considered arguing but realized she was right. They had survived this far by trusting each other. No point in stopping now. They walked up the path to the cabin together, and before Jonah could knock, the door swung open. Samuel Red Sky Walker stood in the doorway, and despite 9 years, Jonah recognized him immediately. He was 68 now, his hair gone completely white and worn long in the Apache style that had earned him his nickname. His eyes were still sharp and blue as a summer sky. He was leaning on a cane, his left leg stiff from an old bullet wound, but there was nothing weak about the man who stared at them from the threshold. "Jonah Blackwood," Red Sky said, his voice rough as tree bark but warm with genuine surprise. "9 years without a word, and now you appear on my doorstep with an Apache woman. This must be one hell of a story." "It is," Jonah said. "Can we come in?" Red Sky stepped aside and gestured them into the cabin. The interior was neat and organized, lined with bookshelves holding more volumes than most frontier settlements had in their entire town. Military histories, philosophy, Apache grammar texts, medical journals. This was the home of a man who had spent his retirement trying to understand a world he had helped break. "Sit," Red Sky said, gesturing to chairs near the fire. "Tell me everything, and do not leave out the parts that make you look bad. Those are usually the most important." Jonah told the story from beginning to end. The auction, the cabin, the attack, Ayanna's identity, Chief Mongus's murder, Clayton Harrow's plot. Red Sky listened without interrupting, his weathered face showing nothing until Ayanna spoke her father's name. Then something shifted in his expression, something like grief. "Chief Mongus," Red Sky said softly when they finished. "I met your father in 1868 during the peace negotiations at Fort Apache. He was the most honorable man I have ever known, regardless of the color of his skin. He saved my life once when a rattlesnake struck me during a parley. He sucked out the poison himself and carried me 2 miles to the fort. I owe him a debt I can never repay." Ayanna stared at him, clearly not expecting this. "You knew my father?" Red Sky nodded. "I did. And I know Clayton Harrow too, unfortunately. The man is a disease wrapped in expensive cloth. But exposing him will take more than your testimony and that map, no matter how damning they are. We need witnesses. We need law. We need someone the territorial government will listen to." "I know someone," Red Sky continued, standing up and moving to a desk in the corner. "Captain Miles Rourke, stationed at Fort Whipple. He is young, idealistic, and most importantly, he is honest. I have already sent him a letter about Harrow's activities. He is investigating, but he needs evidence. Hard evidence. The kind you are carrying." "How long before he can get here?" Jonah asked. Red Sky pulled out a pocket watch and consulted it as if time were something he could measure precisely even in matters of justice. 3 days if he rides hard with a small detachment. Maybe 4 if the weather turns. "Can you two stay hidden that long?" "We will have to," Jonah said. "Harrow thinks we burned in my cabin. He will figure out the truth soon enough, but maybe we have bought ourselves a little time." Red Sky moved to a cabinet and began pulling out supplies. Food, ammunition, blankets, a spare rifle. "Take these," he said. "There is a line shack about 5 miles south, used by shepherds in summer. It is empty now. You can hole up there until Rourke arrives. But Jonah, listen to me carefully." Red Sky's face grew grave. "Harrow is not just going to wait. When he realizes you are alive, he will come at you with everything he has, legal or not legal. He has too much at stake to let this go." "I know," Jonah said quietly. "That is why we need to get that map you mentioned, Ayanna, the one hidden in the sacred caves. Without it, Harrow can claim your father's death was an accident, claim you are lying, claim anything he wants. But with that map showing the silver deposits in his forged deed, we have him." Ayanna nodded slowly. "The sacred caves are 2 days south, deep in Apache territory. My people guard them. They will not welcome a white man. Then you will have to convince them I am not their enemy," Jonah said. Red Sky looked between them and something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You two have formed quite a partnership," he said. "That is good. You are going to need each other before this is over." They left Red Sky's cabin as the sun was setting, loaded with supplies and a renewed sense of purpose. The line shack was exactly where Red Sky said it would be, a small, rough structure that smelled of sheep and old hay, but was blessedly empty and defensible. They barricaded the door and settled in for the night. "Tomorrow," Jonah said, checking the loads in his rifle for the 10th time, "we head south." Ayanna nodded, but her face was troubled. You should know something, she said quietly. If we encounter my people, they may try to kill you on sight. The Chiricahua have been at war with white soldiers for generations. They will not care that you left the army. They will only see your skin. I understand, Jonah said. Then you understand you are risking your life for me, she said. Again, wish I. Jonah set down his rifle and looked at her across the small fire they had built in the shack's stone hearth. Because, he said simply, doing the right thing is never the wrong choice, even when it costs you everything. My wife Mary used to say that. She was smarter than me, always was. Ayanna smiled, a real smile this time, not bitter or guarded. She sounds like someone I would have liked. You would have, Jonah said. And for the first time, talking about Mary did not feel like reopening a wound. It felt like honoring a memory. They both would have liked you very much. The journey south into Apache territory took another day and a half of hard travel. The land changed as they went, becoming more arid, more vertical, all red rock cliffs and hidden canyons that could hide an army if you knew where to look. Ayanna led now, and Jonah followed, trusting her knowledge of this landscape in a way he had trusted few people in his life. She moved with a confidence she had not shown before, as if the land itself was feeding strength back into her bones. This is my home, she said when they stopped to drink from a spring hidden in a crack between two massive boulders. Every stone here has a name. Every canyon has a story. My people have walked this earth for more generations than anyone can count. And men like Harrow think they can just take it with paper and guns. Let them try, Jonah said, and meant it. They reached the sacred caves late in the afternoon of the second day. Ayanna approached slowly, reverently, speaking words in her own language that Jonah did not understand but respected nonetheless. The caves were hidden behind a waterfall, the entrance obscured by curtains of falling water and mist. Inside, the walls were covered with ancient handprints in symbols painted in red ochre and white clay. It was beautiful and eerie, and clearly a place of power. Ayanna moved to a natural altar of stone at the back of the cave and knelt. She reached into a crevice and pulled out a leather pouch, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. Inside was a folded piece of buffalo hide covered in markings and symbols, the map, and beneath it, a piece of paper, official-looking, covered in English words and signatures. The forged treaty. This is it, Ayanna said, her voice shaking slightly. This is what my father died protecting. Before Jonah could respond, a voice spoke from the cave entrance, sharp and cold as a knife blade. So you did come back, and you brought a white demon with you. 3 Apache warriors stepped into the cave, appearing so silently that Jonah had not heard them approach despite his years of wilderness training. They were armed with rifles and bows, their faces painted for war. The one who had spoken was tall and lean, perhaps 35, with a scar running from his forehead to his chin. His eyes burned with an intensity that reminded Jonah of Ayanna. Nalnish, Ayanna said, standing slowly and placing herself between Jonah and the warriors. Cousin, I did not expect to find you here. I have been tracking you since you entered our land, Nalnish replied in English, his accent thick but his meaning clear. I hoped you had escaped the white men. Instead, I find you have become one of their dogs. That is not true, Ayanna said, her voice sharp. This man saved my life. He is fighting against the same enemy who killed my father. Your uncle, Nalonish spat on the ground. All white men are enemies. They speak with forked tongues. They promise peace and bring death. He dies here. Now. Wait, Jonah said, raising his hands slowly, keeping them visible and empty. He did not reach for his rifle, even though it was slung across his back and within reach. If you are going to kill me, I will not fight you. But first, let Ayanna speak. Let her tell you what happened to Chief Mangas. Let her show you what we found. Naalnish hesitated, his rifle still aimed at Jonah's chest. You speak, he said to Ayanna. But if I think he has poisoned your mind, I will put a bullet through his heart and sleep well tonight. Ayanna told the story. Not the abbreviated version she had told Jonah, but the full terrible truth. How Harrow had come with false promises. How her father had seen through the deception. How 6 men had gunned him down in cold blood while she hid and watched. How Harrow had hunted her for weeks before finally having her sold into slavery to break her spirit. She showed them the map, the forged treaty, the evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond one man's death. This white man, she said, pointing at Jonah, paid his last dollar to save me. He burned his home to protect me. He has risked everything to help me bring justice for my father. He is not our enemy. Naalnish listened, his face unreadable. When she finished, he lowered his rifle slowly. If what you say is true, he said, then this hero must die. But why should we trust him? He pointed at Jonah. Why should we believe a man who once led soldiers to our camps? How do you know about that? Jonah asked quietly. Because I was at Skeleton Canyon, Nalnish said, and his voice was full of old pain and fresh rage. I was 15 years old. I watched my mother die that day. I remember the scout who led the Yellow Legs to us. I remember his face. Jonah felt the weight of that memory settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. Then you know I cannot undo what was done, he said. I cannot bring back the dead. I cannot erase my shame. But I can tell you this, I left the army because of what happened that day. I have spent 9 years trying to forget, trying to die slowly on a mountain, because I did not have the courage to face what I had done. Ayanna gave me that courage back. She gave me a reason to stop running. And I will spend the rest of my life, however long or short it may be, trying to make amends. Naalnish stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He lowered his rifle completely and held out his hand. If Ayanna trusts you, he said, then I will not kill you today. But know this, white man. If you betray her, if you bring harm to our people, I will hunt you through this world and the next. I will make your death last days. Jonah took his hand and shook it once, firmly. If I betray her, he said, I will let you. They emerged from the sacred caves as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of red and gold that looked like fire. Naalnish and his 2 warriors agreed to escort them back toward Prescott, providing protection through the most dangerous stretches of Apache land. As they walked, Naalnish told them what he knew of Harrow's movements. The White Devil has been sending more men into our territory, he said. They are searching for something. Probably for you. His reach extends far. Even some of our own people have been bribed or threatened into cooperation. You must be very careful when you return to the white man's town. We will, Ayanna promised. And Naalnish, thank you for not killing him. I did not do it for him, Naalnish replied, but his voice had softened slightly. I did it for you. And for your father, who always said that judging a man by his actions today is wiser than judging him by his sins yesterday. Chief Mongus was a wise man. They camped that night on the border between Apache land and white settlements, in a place where the 2 worlds met but did not mingle. Jonah sat apart from the Apache warriors, giving them space and showing respect for their distrust. But Ayanna sat with him, close enough that their shoulders touched. You did well today, she said quietly. Facing Naalnish took courage. Facing the truth of what you did took more. It does not make it right, Jonah said. Nothing can make it right. No, Ayanna agreed, but it makes you different from the men who did the killing and felt nothing. It makes you human. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Finally, Ayanna spoke again, her voice so soft Jonah almost missed it. That star there, she said, pointing. The bright one. My father told me it was the eye of the Great Spirit, always watching to make sure we walk the right path. What did your wife believe? Jonah followed her finger to Polaris, the North Star, steady and unchanging in the sky. Mary believed the stars were the souls of good people, he said. She said when she died, she would become the brightest star so I could always find my way home. Which one is she? Ayanna asked. That one, Jonah said, pointing to the same star Ayanna had indicated. The one that never moves. The one that always points true north. Ayanna looked at him, and in the firelight her eyes were soft. Then perhaps my father and your wife are together, she said. Perhaps they are both watching over us and hoping we do not mess this up too badly. Perhaps, Jonah said, and for the first time in 9 years the thought of Mary watching him did not fill him with shame. It filled him with something like hope. The next morning, Naalnish and his warriors left them at the edge of Prescott's outlying farms with final warnings to trust no one and watch for Harrow's men everywhere. Jonah and Ayanna waited until full dark before entering the town, moving like shadows through alleyways and staying away from the main streets. They needed to reach Red Skywalker's cabin without being seen, but first they needed one thing: medical attention. Ayanna's wrists, torn raw by the ropes during her captivity and never properly treated, had become infected. Red streaks were beginning to creep up her forearms, and she had developed a fever. She had not complained, but Jonah had noticed the way she favored her hands, the way she winced when anything touched her wrists. "There is a doctor in town," Jonah said as they crouched behind a livery stable, watching the street for patrols. "Henry Brennan. Good man, honest. He will help us." "How can you be sure?" Ayanna asked, her voice slightly slurred with fever. "Because he was Mary's doctor," Jonah said. "He stayed with her through 3 days of fever, would not leave her side even when there was no hope. When she died, he cried. Any man who cries for a patient he could not save is a man with a soul." They made their way to Doc Brennan's house, a neat clapboard structure on the quiet end of town. Jonah knocked softly, a specific pattern, 3 slow and 2 fast, the signal he and the doctor had used years ago when Jonah was still part of the civilized world. The door opened a crack, and a gray-bearded face peered out. Then the door swung wide. "Jonah Blackwood," Doc Brennan whispered, his voice full of shock. "Lord Almighty, I thought you were dead. And you brought someone." He looked at Ayanna, taking in her fevered eyes and the crude bandages on her wrists. "Come in quickly, both of you, before someone sees." Inside, Doc Brennan's house was warm and smelled of carbolic acid and pipe tobacco. His wife Martha appeared from the kitchen, a stout woman with kind eyes and flour on her hands. She took one look at Ayanna and immediately began heating water and gathering clean cloths without being asked. "Sit her down," Doc Brennan commanded, gesturing to a chair near the examination table. "What happened to her wrists?" "Rope burns," Jonah said. "From an auction. Sutter sold her like an animal." The doctor's face darkened. "Pike Sutter should be horsewhipped and hung," he muttered. "But that will have to wait. Let me see those wounds, young lady." Ayanna allowed the doctor to unwrap the makeshift bandages Jonah had applied. The wounds beneath were ugly, weeping pus, and surrounded by angry red inflammation. Doc Brennan hissed through his teeth. "This is bad," he said. "Another day and you would have lost the hands to gangrene. I need to clean these properly, and I will not lie to you. It is going to hurt like hell." Ayanna met his eyes steadily. "I have endured worse," she said. "Do what you must." The doctor worked quickly and efficiently, washing the wounds with carbolic acid that made Ayanna's jaw clench so hard Jonah could hear her teeth grinding together. But she did not cry out. Martha brought tea and placed a gentle hand on Ayanna's shoulder. "You are safe here, child," she said softly. "Whatever trouble you are in, whatever men are chasing you, you are safe in this house." Ayanna looked up at the older woman, and something in her fierce expression softened slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. When the doctor finished bandaging her wrists with clean white cloth, he sat back and looked at Jonah with serious eyes. "She will heal," he said, "but she needs rest. Real rest, not running through mountains. Can you give her that?" "Not yet," Jonah said. "Soon, but not yet. We have something we need to do first, something that cannot wait." "It is about Clayton Harrow, is it not?" Martha said from the kitchen doorway, and both Jonah and the doctor turned to look at her in surprise. "How did you know?" Jonah asked. "Because," Martha said, wiping her hands on her apron, "the whole town knows Harrow is looking for someone. He has men asking questions in every saloon and boarding house. He is offering money for information about a mountain man and an Apache woman. Most folks are too scared of him to talk, but word spreads. You two need to be very careful." "We will be," Ayanna said. "But first, we need to get evidence to Captain Rourke at Fort Whipple." Doc Brennan nodded slowly. "Rourke is a good man. If anyone can bring Harrow to justice, it is him. But getting to him will not be easy. Harrow has the roads watched." "I can help with that," Red Skywalker's voice came from the back door, making them all jump. The old colonel stepped into the room, moving surprisingly quietly for a man with a cane. "I let myself in through the garden," he said to Doc Brennan. "Hope you do not mind." "Never mind me," Doc Brennan said. "Just try not to give an old man a heart attack next time." Red Sky looked at Ayanna's bandaged wrists and nodded with satisfaction. "Good. You got medical attention. Now we need to talk strategy." Rourke sent word. He will be here tomorrow with a detachment of cavalry. But here's the problem. Harrow knows something is happening. He has lawyers and fake witnesses ready to discredit anything you say. We need to force his hand, make him act rashly, expose himself before he can prepare a defense. How do we do that? Jonah asked. Red Sky smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We let him think he has won, the old soldier said. We let him think he has captured you. And when he gets arrogant and makes a mistake, we spring the trap. The plan Red Sky outlined was dangerous and required perfect timing. They would let word slip that Ayanna was hiding in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Harrow would send his men to capture her. But instead of Ayanna, they would find Jonah waiting with the forged treaty and map, ready to make a deal. He would offer to sell the evidence to Harrow for $1,000, playing the part of a mercenary who had changed sides. When Harrow arrived to make the exchange, Captain Rourke and his men would be waiting to arrest him. It is risky, Doc Brendan said. If Harrow smells a trap, he will kill you both and disappear. Maybe, Jonah agreed, but we are out of time and out of options. Harrow will figure out we survived the cabin fire any day now. Once he does, he will come at us with everything he has. This way, we control the ground and the timing. Ayanna looked at Jonah with concern etched across her face. You are making yourself bait, she said. Again, you keep putting yourself in danger for me, because that is what partners do, Jonah said simply. And like it or not, we are partners now. You watch my back, I watch yours. That is how this works. Fine, Ayanna said, and her voice took on that steel edge that Jonah had come to respect and fear in equal measure. But I am coming with you to that warehouse. You are not facing Harrow alone. Red Sky started to object, but Jonah held up a hand. She is right, he said. We face this together or not at all. Red Sky sighed but nodded. Very well. Then we set the plan in motion tonight. Martha, can you spread word through the church ladies that you saw an Apache woman hiding near the old Miller warehouse? Martha smiled grimly. Consider it done. Those women gossip faster than telegraph lines. It will be all over town by sunrise. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Doc Brennan provided additional medical supplies and a Derringer pistol, small enough for Ayanna to hide in her dress. Martha prepared food packages, enough for several days in case they needed to run again. Red Sky checked their weapons and ammunition, his old soldier's hands moving with practiced efficiency. And Jonah sat with Ayanna in the corner of the room, speaking quietly about what would come next. If something goes wrong, Jonah said, if Harrow gets the upper hand, you run. Do you understand me? You take that map and you run to Fort Whipple. Find Rourke. He will protect you. No, Ayanna said flatly. We do not separate. Not now. Not after everything. Ayanna, listen to me, Jonah began, but she cut him off. No, you listen, she said, her amber eyes blazing even through the fever. I have been running my whole life, running from soldiers, running from miners, running from men who wanted to break me, or kill me, or sell me. I am done running. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. If you die, I die beside you. That is the end of the discussion. Jonah looked at her for a long moment, seeing the determination in every line of her face. Finally, he nodded. Together then, he said. To the end. To the end, she agreed. They shook hands, and then, impulsively, Ayanna leaned forward and kissed his cheek. It was brief and chaste, but it carried a weight of meaning that made Jonah's breath catch in his chest. For luck, she said softly, pulling back. For courage. For luck, Jonah repeated, and allowed himself to smile. For courage. As dawn approached, they made their way to the abandoned Miller warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a large wooden structure, once used for storing grain before the mine it served had played out. Now it was empty and echoing, full of shadows and hiding places. Perfect for an ambush. They took positions inside, Jonah near the main entrance with clear lines of sight and retreat. Ayanna in the hayloft above, where she could cover him with the rifle Red Sky had provided. Outside, hidden in the surrounding buildings, Captain Rourke and his cavalry soldiers waited silently. Now we wait, Jonah said, checking his weapons one final time. Now we wait, Ayanna agreed from above. And when Harrow comes, she added softly, we show him that some people cannot be bought or broken or silenced. Jonah looked up at her, backlit by the early morning light filtering through cracks in the roof, and thought she looked like some ancient warrior goddess preparing for battle. We show him, Jonah agreed. And we make sure he never forgets it. The sun rose slowly over Prescott, painting the desert sky in shades of red and gold. In the warehouse, two people who had started as strangers become allies, and were now something more waited for the moment when justice and vengeance would finally meet. The stage was set, the trap was laid, and Clayton Harrow, for all his money and power and careful planning, was about to learn that some debts come due no matter how hard you try to run from them. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains when the sound of approaching horses broke the tense silence surrounding the Miller warehouse. Jonah counted 6 riders, moving with the careful formation of men who expected trouble. They were led by a figure he recognized even at a distance. Garrett Lynch, Harrow's chief enforcer, the man whose voice had taunted them from the trees outside Jonah's burning cabin. But Lynch was not the prize they were waiting for. Lynch was just the advanced scout, the man sent to confirm the trap before the spider came to collect his prey. From her position in the hayloft, Ayanna watched through a gap in the boards, her finger resting alongside the trigger guard of her rifle. Not yet, she whispered to herself, remembering Jonah's instructions. Let them commit. Let them come inside. Let them think they have won. Lynch dismounted 20 yards from the warehouse entrance, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The other 5 men spread out, covering potential escape routes with professional efficiency. These were not common thugs. These were experienced killers who had survived the war and found their skills still marketable in the brutal economy of the frontier. Blackwood, Lynch called out, his voice echoing off the warehouse walls. I know you are in there. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard. Your choice. The smart play is to walk out with your hands up and the documents in your possession. Mr. Harrow is a reasonable man. He is prepared to be generous. Jonah stepped into the doorway, visible but protected by the thick doorframe. His Sharps rifle was pointed downward, unthreatening for the moment, but ready to be raised in an instant. Generous, Jonah repeated, his voice flat. That is an interesting word for a man who murders peacemakers and sells women into slavery. Lynch shrugged, unbothered by the accusation. Business is business, Blackwood. You used to be a soldier. You understand how the world works. The strong take what they want. The weak lose what they have. That is the natural order. You could be on the winning side if you are smart. Mr. Harrow sent me to make you an offer. $1,000 in gold for the map and the treaty. You walk away rich. The Apache girl walks away breathing. Everybody wins, except justice, Jonah said. Except truth. Except the memory of a good man gunned down for refusing to surrender what was not his to give. Lynch laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Justice is what the man with the most money says it is. Truth is whatever story gets written in the history books. And Chief Mongas is dead, which means his memory does not matter a damn bit. Now, are we going to make a deal or are we going to have a problem? Before Jonah could answer, a new voice cut through the morning air, smooth and cultured and utterly cold. I think we are going to have a problem, Mr. Lynch. Clayton Harrow rode into view on a magnificent black stallion, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most men earned in a year. He was 51 years old but looked younger, his hair silver but thick, his face unlined except for faint creases around his eyes. He looked like a senator or a banker, someone who belonged in carpeted offices, making decisions that affected thousands of lives with the stroke of a pen. He did not look like a murderer. But then, Jonah reflected, the worst ones never did. Harrow dismounted with practiced grace and walked forward until he stood beside Lynch, close enough to be heard clearly, but far enough from the warehouse to retreat quickly if necessary. Mr. Blackwood, Harrow said, his voice carrying the slight accent of Virginia aristocracy, I have heard a great deal about you. The mountain hermit who bought an Apache savage for $1 and then burned his own home to protect her. That is either the act of a saint or a madman. I have not decided which yet. Neither, Jonah said. It is the act of a man who was tired of watching evil prosper while good men did nothing. Harrow smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Evil is such a dramatic word. I prefer to think of myself as a pragmatist. Chief Mongas held land that contained valuable mineral deposits. I offered him fair compensation. He refused out of superstition and stubborn pride. So I removed the obstacle. That is not evil, Mr. Blackwood. That is progress. You murdered him, Jonah said, his voice hardening, in cold blood, while his daughter watched. That is not progress. That is cowardice dressed up in fancy words. Harrow's smile faded. His eyes, Jonah noticed, were the pale blue of winter ice and just as warm. I do not expect you to understand, Harrow said. You are a simple man with simple morals. Black and white, right and wrong. The world does not work that way. Sometimes good men must do terrible things to build civilization out of chaos. My son died in an Apache raid 15 years ago. He was 8 years old. They burned him alive while I watched from a distance, unable to reach him in time. So do not lecture me about morality, Blackwood. I know exactly what these savages are capable of. From her position in the hayloft, Ayanna felt her finger tighten on the trigger. She wanted to put a bullet through Harrow's skull, to end this here and now, consequences be damned. But she remembered Jonah's words. If we kill him without trial, we become what he is. We become murderers who decide justice at the end of a gun. We are better than that. We have to be better than that. I am sorry for your loss, Jonah said, and meant it. No child should die that way. No parent should have to witness it. But your son's death does not give you the right to murder innocents in return. It does not give you the right to steal land or forge treaties or turn grief into gold. Harrow stared at him for a long moment, and something dangerous flickered behind those ice blue eyes. You have the documents, he said. It was not a question. I do, Jonah confirmed, and I am prepared to give them to you. In exchange for what? Harrow asked, his voice suddenly sharp with interest. In exchange for a confession, Jonah said. You tell these men, all of them, exactly what you did. How you killed Chief Mongus. How you forged the treaty. How you planned to steal Apache land and sell it to the railroad. You tell the truth, and I will give you the documents and disappear. You will never see me or Ayanna again. Harrow studied him for a long moment and then began to laugh. It was a genuine laugh, full of real amusement, and somehow that made it more chilling than any threat. You actually think I am stupid enough to confess my crimes in front of witnesses? You think I am going to hand you evidence that could see me hanged? My dear Blackwood, I expected better from a former Army scout. You should understand tactics. Lynch and his men shifted uncomfortably, hands moving closer to their weapons. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, sliding toward violence like a wagon with failed brakes heading down a mountain. Actually, a new voice rang out from beyond the warehouse. I think that confession sounds like an excellent idea. Captain Miles Rourke stepped into view from behind a building across the street, followed by 12 cavalry soldiers with rifles raised and ready. They moved with military precision, forming a semicircle that cut off any escape route. Rourke was 36 years old, younger than most officers of his rank, with the kind of face that inspired trust. He wore his uniform with pride but without arrogance, and his eyes held the steady gaze of a man who had seen combat and come away believing that some things were worth fighting for. Clayton Harrow, Rourke called out, his voice carrying the authority of federal law. You are under arrest for the murder of Chief Mangas, for conspiracy to commit fraud, for forgery of federal documents, and for about a dozen other charges that I will be happy to enumerate once we have you in custody. Stand down. Harrow's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, anger, and finally a kind of cold acceptance. He was a man used to having plans fall apart and adapting quickly. This is preposterous, he said, his voice shifting to the reasonable tone of an injured party. I am a respected businessman. You cannot just arrest me on the word of a hermit and a savage with a grudge. I am not arresting you on their word, Rourke said calmly. I am arresting you on the evidence gathered over 6 months of investigation, on testimony from witnesses you thought were too afraid to speak, on financial records that show exactly where your money came from and where it went. The mountain man and the Apache woman are just the final pieces of a puzzle I have been assembling for a very long time. Lynch and his men were looking at each other nervously now, weighing their options. They were professional enough to know when a situation had turned hopeless. Fighting cavalry soldiers in broad daylight was a good way to die quickly and pointlessly. One by one, they began to raise their hands and lower their weapons, all except Harrow. The land speculator reached into his coat with sudden speed and pulled out a small Derringer pistol, the kind favored by gamblers and desperate men. He grabbed Lynch by the shoulder and pressed the barrel against his own enforcer's temple. Nobody moves, Harrow shouted, his cultured voice finally cracking to show the desperation beneath. I walk out of here, or Lynch dies. Then I suggest you start walking, Lynch said flatly, his voice steady despite the gun against his head. Because I am not worth what you think I am worth. And these cavalry boys do not negotiate with cowards. Harrow's hand trembled slightly. For a moment, Jonah thought he might actually pull the trigger, might kill his own man out of spite or rage or simple refusal to accept defeat. But then Ayanna's voice cut through the tension, clear and strong from the hayloft. Clayton Harrow. The land speculator's head jerked up, searching for the source of the voice. Ayanna stood in the loft opening, fully visible now, her rifle pointed steadily at his chest. My name is Ayanna, daughter of Chief Mongus of the Chiricahua Apache, she said, and her voice rang with a power that made every man present stand a little straighter. You murdered my father because he would not sell his people's land. You tried to break me because I witnessed your crime. You failed. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter but somehow more devastating. You said your son died in an Apache raid. I am sorry for that. Truly. No child should die in war. But my people did not start this war, Mr. Harrow. We did not come to your land demanding you leave or die. We did not sign treaties promising peace and then break them when gold or silver was discovered. We defended our homes. That is all we have ever done. And now, she continued, her voice growing stronger again, you have a choice. The same choice my father faced. You can die with honor, accepting responsibility for your crimes, or you can die a coward, remembered by history as a man who killed children and old men and claimed it was progress. Choose. The warehouse was silent except for the wind whistling through gaps in the walls. Harrow stood frozen, the derringer still pressed against Lynch's head, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, slowly, he lowered the gun. He released Lynch, who stepped away quickly and was immediately restrained by two cavalry soldiers. Harrow let the derringer fall from his fingers to land in the dust. You are wrong, he said to Ayanna, his voice hollow now, emptied of its earlier confidence. History will forget both of us. History remembers empires and railroads and great movements. It does not remember one dead Indian chief or one land speculator who failed. We are both footnotes. Perhaps, Ayanna said, but I would rather be a footnote who told the truth than a footnote who lived a lie. Captain Rourke stepped forward and placed iron manacles on Harrow's wrists. Clayton Harrow, he said formally, you are hereby remanded to federal custody to await trial before a territorial judge. May God have mercy on your soul, because I suspect the court will not. As the soldiers led Harrow away, the land speculator looked back at Jonah one final time. You should have taken the money, he said quietly. You could have been rich. You could have lived in comfort instead of dying poor on some mountain. I was already dying on that mountain, Jonah replied. She gave me a reason to live instead. That is worth more than all the silver in Arizona. Harrow said nothing more. They took him away in chains, and Jonah felt something heavy lift from his shoulders, a burden he had been carrying since Skeleton Canyon all those years ago. It was not redemption. It was not forgiveness. But it was justice, and that was something. Ayanna climbed down from the loft, moving carefully on her bandaged wrists. When she reached the ground, Jonah was waiting. They looked at each other for a long moment, and then, without words, they embraced. It was not romantic. It was the embrace of soldiers who had survived a battle, of partners who had trusted each other with their lives and found that trust rewarded. We did it, Ayanna whispered against his chest. We actually did it. We did, Jonah confirmed. He did not say the rest of what he was thinking, that this was only the beginning, that Harrow would have allies and lawyers, that the trial would be long and difficult, that there would be people who refused to accept an Apache woman's testimony no matter what evidence supported it. But for now, in this moment, they had won. That was enough. Captain Rourke approached them, removing his cavalry hat respectfully. Miss Ayanna, he said, Mr. Blackwood, on behalf of the United States Army and the people of Arizona Territory, I want to thank you for your courage. I know this was not easy. It was necessary, Ayanna said simply. That is all, Rourke nodded. The trial will begin in 2 weeks in Prescott. I will need both of you to testify. I can arrange for protection in the meantime if you need it. We will be fine, Jonah said. We have places we can go, people we can trust. But Captain, I have one question. Ask it, Rourke said. When you heard about what Harrow had done, why did you care? Most Army officers would have looked the other way. Most would have said it was not their problem. Rourke was silent for a moment, looking out at the desert that stretched away toward the mountains. Because 15 years ago, he said quietly, I was a lieutenant at Fort Apache. I was ordered to participate in a raid on an Apache village. I was told it was a warrior camp. When we arrived, I realized it was families, old people, children. I refused to fire. I tried to stop it. For that, I was court-martialed and nearly drummed out of the service. Only the intervention of a few honest superior officers saved my career. Rourke looked at Ayanna directly. I have spent every day since trying to make up for what I could not prevent. I cannot bring back the dead, but I can try to make sure that justice exists, even on this brutal frontier, for everyone, not just for white settlers, for everyone. Ayanna studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. My father would have called you a good man, she said. That is the highest praise I can give. Rourke bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, then turned and walked back to his men, leaving Jonah and Ayanna standing in the dusty street as the sun climbed higher into the morning sky. The trial of Clayton Harrow began exactly 2 weeks later in the Prescott Courthouse, a building that had been constructed only 3 years earlier and still smelled of fresh pine and varnish. The courtroom was packed to overflowing with spectators, reporters, and people whose only interest was in seeing a powerful man brought low. Judge Marcus Thornton, a severe man in his 60s with a reputation for absolute fairness, presided over the proceedings with an iron hand. He allowed no outbursts, no demonstrations, no disruptions of any kind. The evidence was presented methodically over 3 days. Captain Rourke testified about his investigation, detailing financial records that showed payments to Lynch and his men, correspondence with railroad executives discussing land acquisition, and witness statements from townspeople who had seen or heard damning conversations. Doc Brennan testified about treating Ayanna's injuries, describing rope burns consistent with prolonged captivity and abuse. Red Sky Walker testified about Chief Mongas's character and his commitment to peace, providing context that made the murder seem even more heinous. But the testimony that mattered most came on the third day, when Ayanna took the stand. She wore a simple dress that Martha Brennan had made for her, blue cotton with white trim, respectable but not fancy. The long sleeves covered her wrists, where faint white scars remained from the rope burns, though Doc Brennan's skilled treatment had saved her from permanent damage. Her hair was braided in the Apache style, and she wore a silver pendant that had belonged to her father. She walked to the witness chair with her head high and her shoulders straight, and when she placed her hand on the Bible to swear her oath, her voice did not waver. The prosecution attorney, a sharp-featured man named Frederick Walsh, led her through the events of that terrible night. Tell the court in your own words what you witnessed on the evening of September 15th, 1876. Ayanna took a breath and began to speak. Her English was clear and precise, her voice steady. She described hiding in the next room while Harrow and his men confronted her father. She repeated the conversation word for word, or as close as memory allowed. She described the sound of gunfire and her father's body falling. She described running into the night and hiding in the sacred caves, living on roots and rainwater, until Harrow's men finally tracked her down. When she finished, there was absolute silence in the courtroom. Even the reporters had stopped scratching their pencils against paper. Judge Thornton leaned forward. Miss Ayanna, he said quietly, I have one question for you. Why should this court believe your testimony? You are Apache. Your people have been at war with white settlers for decades. How do we know you are not simply seeking revenge against a white man, any white man, for the wrongs done to your people? Ayanna looked at the judge directly, her amber eyes clear and unflinching. Your Honor, she said, if I wanted revenge on white men, I had many opportunities. I could have killed Jonah Blackwood while he slept. I could have led him into an ambush. I could have taken the evidence my father died protecting and disappeared into Mexico, where no white law could touch me. But I did not do those things. I did not seek revenge. I sought justice. There is a difference. Revenge is about anger and pain. Justice is about truth and accountability. I am not asking you to punish Clayton Harrow because he is white and I am Apache. I am asking you to punish him because he is a murderer, and murderers should face consequences regardless of their wealth or position. The courtroom remained silent for another long moment. Then Judge Thornton nodded slowly. Thank you, Miss Ayana. That is a distinction this court recognizes and respects. You may step down. But before Ayana could leave the witness chair, Harrow's defense attorney, a slick man named Cornelius Dodge, who had been brought in from Denver specifically for this case, stood up. Your Honor, I have a few questions for this witness. The judge gestured for Ayana to remain seated. Proceed, Mr. Dodge, but keep it brief. We have already spent 3 days on this matter. Dodge approached the witness stand with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Miss Ayana, he began, his voice oozing false sympathy, is it not true that you were found in possession of documents that supposedly prove my client's guilt? Yes, Ayana said. Documents that were hidden in a sacred Apache cave, correct? Yes, Ayana repeated. And is it not possible, Dodge continued, his voice growing sharper, that these documents were forged? That you or your Apache confederates created false evidence to frame an innocent man? That you are in fact engaged in a conspiracy to steal land that legally belongs to white settlers? Before Ayana could answer, a voice spoke from the back of the courtroom. That is not possible. Everyone turned to look. An elderly man in priest's robes walked slowly down the center aisle, leaning heavily on a wooden staff. It was Father Miguel Santos, the missionary who had taught Ayana English all those years ago. He looked older than time itself, his face weathered by decades in the desert sun, but his eyes were sharp and his voice was strong. Father Santos, Judge Thornton said, clearly surprised. What are you doing here? I am here to testify, Your Honor, the priest said. I should have come forward sooner, but I am an old man and travel is difficult. However, I cannot in good conscience allow this young woman's character to be impugned when I have information that proves her truthfulness. The judge looked at the prosecution attorney, who looked as surprised as everyone else. Mr. Walsh, do you wish to call this witness? I do, Your Honor, Walsh said quickly, recovering his composure. Very much so. Father Santos was sworn in and took the seat Ayana had just vacated. He looked out at the crowded courtroom and began to speak. I have lived among the Chiricahua Apache for 42 years, he said. I learned their language. I taught many of them English and Spanish. I baptized their children. I buried their dead. Chief Mongus was a friend of mine, a true friend. 2 months before his death, he came to me with documents that Clayton Harrow had given him. He asked me to translate them and explain their legal meaning. I did so. The documents were not treaties, they were deeds of sale. They would have transferred ownership of Apache land containing valuable silver deposits to Mr. Harrow's company for a payment of $500. $500 for land worth millions. Chief Mongus refused to sign. He told me he would die before he betrayed his people's trust. Ayana's face was troubled. Father Santos taught me to read, she said quietly. He was there when Harrow brought those documents. If only he could testify. Red Sky looked at her thoughtfully. Father Miguel Santos still lives, he said. Very old now, at the San Pedro mission. The journey here would be hard for him, but I could send word. If he is willing and able, his testimony would be invaluable. Please, Ayana said. He is the only other witness besides me. Without him, it is my word against Harrow's lawyers. I will send a writer today, Red Sky promised. Father Santos paused, his voice thick with emotion when he spoke again of that day. 1 month after refusing Harrow, Chief Mongus was dead. And 3 weeks after that, I heard that his daughter had been captured and sold into slavery. I wanted to come forward then, but I was afraid of Mr. Harrow's power, afraid of what might happen to my mission and the people I serve. I am not proud of my cowardice, but I am here now, and I swear before God and this court that every word I have spoken is true. Father Santos lowered his head, exhausted by the weight of his testimony. For a moment, the courtroom was absolutely silent, the gravity of his words settling over everyone like snow. Then a man in the back gallery stood up abruptly. It was one of Harrow's remaining hired guns, a scarred brute named Cobb who had escaped the warehouse raid. His hand went to his coat. She is lying, he screamed, his face purple with rage. All of you! This is a conspiracy to steal white man's land. His pistol came out, barrel swinging toward Ayanna. Jonah saw it happening, as if time had slowed to a crawl. He launched himself sideways, throwing his body between Ayanna and the gun. The pistol cracked once, deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. The bullet meant for Ayanna's heart caught Jonah in the left shoulder, spinning him halfway around. He crashed into the witness stand and went down hard. Captain Rourke and two deputies were already moving, tackling Cobb before he could fire again. The gun clattered across the floor. Rourke's fist connected with Cobb's jaw 3 times in rapid succession, and the man went limp. Ayanna was on her knees beside Jonah, her hands pressed against his shoulder, where blood was spreading across his shirt. "Jonah," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Jonah, stay with me." "It is nothing," he managed through gritted teeth, though his face had gone gray. "Flesh wound, I have had worse. You threw yourself in front of a bullet for me," she said, and there were tears in her eyes now, the first tears he had ever seen her shed. Again. "Because that is what we do," he said, and managed a weak smile. "Partners." Judge Thornton's gavel came down like thunder. "Order! This court is in recess. Someone get Doc Brennan, now!" The courtroom erupted in noise, spectators shouting questions, reporters scrambling for the doors to file their stories. Judge Thornton slammed his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "Mr. Dodge," he said, his voice cold, "do you have any further questions for Miss Ayanna?" Dodge looked like a man who had just watched his entire case collapse. He shook his head mutely. "Then she is excused," the judge said. He looked at the jury, 12 men who had been listening to testimony for 3 days, with expressions ranging from boredom to fascination. "Gentlemen of the jury," he said, "you have heard the evidence. You have seen the documents. You have heard testimony from multiple credible witnesses. I will give you 1 hour to deliberate." The jury returned in 45 minutes. Their foreman, a shopkeeper named William Hayes, stood and addressed the court. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Clayton Harrow, guilty on all charges: murder in the first degree, conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of federal documents. We recommend the maximum sentence allowable under territorial law." Doc Brennan arrived within minutes, his medical bag in hand. He examined Jonah's shoulder right there in the courtroom, cutting away the blood-soaked shirt. "Clean through," he announced with relief. "Missed the bone and the major vessels." "You are a lucky man, Blackwood." "Lucky," Jonah repeated, wincing as the doctor cleaned the wound. "Or she is." He looked at Ayanna. "Either way, I will take it." The trial resumed 20 minutes later, with Jonah's shoulder bandaged and his arm in a makeshift sling. He refused to leave, sitting beside Ayanna in the gallery with his good hand holding hers. Judge Thornton looked at both of them with something approaching respect before turning his attention back to the defense table. Judge Thornton looked at Harrow, who sat at the defense table with his face completely expressionless, as if he had left his body and was watching the proceedings from somewhere far away. "Clayton Harrow," the judge said, "you are hereby sentenced to 25 years hard labor at the Territorial Prison in Yuma. You will forfeit all assets acquired through illegal means, which will be returned to their rightful owners or held in trust for the Apache people. You will never hold public office or engage in land speculation again. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none to offer." The bailiffs led Harrow away in chains. As he passed the gallery where Jonah and Ayanna sat, he looked at them one final time. His eyes were empty now, all the calculation and cruelty burned away to leave nothing but ash. They did not look away. They watched him until he disappeared through the door that led to the cells below the courthouse, and then they sat in silence as the courtroom slowly emptied around them. Harrow's arrest was only the beginning of justice's reckoning. In the week that followed, the territorial marshal rounded up the remaining members of his operation. Garrett Lynch, facing charges of attempted murder and conspiracy, accepted a plea bargain and was sentenced to 12 years hard labor. He would die in Yuma prison 4 years later, killed in a fight with another inmate. Pike Sutter, the man who had sold Ayanna on that auction block, fled Arizona the day news of Harrow's conviction reached Prescott. He was found dead 6 months later in a Colorado mining camp, shot through the back during a car game gone wrong. Some said it was random violence. Others whispered that Naalnish had tracked him north and delivered Apache justice in the dark. No one investigated too closely. 4 months passed. By late March of 1877, winter's harsh grip had finally loosened. The desert exploded with color as wildflowers bloomed in response to early rains, painting the land in shades of yellow and purple that seemed impossible after so much gray. Jonah stood on the porch of a new cabin he had built, not on Devil's Spine, but on a piece of land at the border between Apache territory and white settlements. His left shoulder, where Cobb's bullet had torn through, still ached on cold mornings. But Doc Brennan had done good work. The scar would remain, but the arm was strong again. Not on Devil's Spine, but on a piece of land at the border between Apache territory and white settlements. It was a compromised location, a place where two worlds could meet without conflict. Red Skywalker had helped him secure the deed, and Captain Rourke had vouched for him with the Territorial Land Office. The cabin was smaller than his old one, but better built, with glass windows and a stone fireplace, and a second room that could serve as a bedroom or a study, or whatever else might be needed. Ayanna rode up the path on a dappled mare that Naalnish had given her. She wore both Apache and white clothing now, moccasins and a long skirt, a cotton blouse, and a leather vest decorated with traditional beadwork. She moved between worlds with an ease that Jonah envied, comfortable in both, but bound to neither. "You are finished with your work?" Jonah asked as she dismounted. She had been spending half her time at the Apache settlement, teaching English to children and serving as a liaison between her people and the territorial government. "For today," she said, "Naalnish asked me to tell you that the spring hunt was successful. They want to invite you to the feast next week." Jonah smiled. "That is the third invitation this month. I am starting to think they actually like me." "Some of them do," Ayanna said, climbing the steps to stand beside him. "Others still do not trust white men and probably never will. But they respect you. That is more important." They sat together on the porch, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple and red. It was the same sky they had watched the night before the trial, but everything felt different now. Lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from both their shoulders. "What happens now?" Jonah asked quietly. "Do you stay here? Do you go back to your people? Do we continue this strange partnership we have built? Or do you decide you have had enough of angry white men and their complicated lives?" Ayanna looked at him with an expression that was equal parts amusement and exasperation. "For a smart man," she said, "you ask very stupid questions sometimes." She reached into the pocket of her skirt and pulled out something small and silver. She held it out to him. It was a dollar coin worn smooth by time and handling. Jonah recognized it immediately. "That is the dollar I paid for you," he said, confused. "Why do you still have it?" "Because," Ayanna said, pressing it into his palm and closing his fingers around it, "I am buying you back. You paid $1 for my life. Now I am paying $1 for yours. We are even. Partners. Equals." She paused and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "And maybe, if you can stop being so dense, something more than partners." Jonah stared at the coin in his hand, then at her face, reading the truth there that he had been afraid to acknowledge. "When Mary died," he said slowly, "I thought I would never feel anything again. I thought that part of me died with her on that fever bed." "I was wrong," Ayanna said gently. "You were grieving. But grief ends, Jonah. It changes, but it ends. And when it ends, life continues. Mary would want you to live. She would want you to be happy." "How do you know what Mary would want?" Jonah asked, but there was no anger in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "Because I know what my father would want," Ayanna said. "He would want me to honor his memory by living well, not by dying slowly in the desert. He would want me to build something new, not just guard something old. So that is what I am doing. I am choosing life, I am choosing hope, and I am choosing you." Jonah looked at the dollar coin, warm from her hand, and made a decision. He took a nail from his pocket and a hammer that was leaning against the cabin wall. He walked to the door frame and with 3 precise strikes, nailed the coin above the entrance. "There," he said, "now everyone who enters this house will know its price. $1, the cost of freedom, the value of courage, the price of choosing to do what is right, even when it costs you everything." Ayanna stood beside him, looking up at the coin glinting in the last light of day. "And what do we build here?" she asked. "In this house between two worlds?" "We build a home," Jonah said simply. "We build a place where Apache and white can sit at the same table and eat the same food and realize they are not so different. We build a legacy that says two people from different worlds who had every reason to hate each other chose something better. We build hope. Ayana nodded slowly. I like that, she said. I like it very much. She took his hand and they stood together on the porch of their new home, watching night fall over the desert. Behind them, the silver dollar gleamed above the door, a reminder of where they had come from. Before them stretched the future, uncertain and challenging, but no longer hopeless. In the years that followed, their story became legend. Two people from different worlds had found common ground in the pursuit of justice. And in finding justice, they had found each other. Jonah Black would never return to Devil's Spine. He did not need to. He had found a new mountain to climb, a new challenge to face, teaching young Apache men to read and write, helping negotiate treaties that were actually fair, standing as a bridge between cultures that had been at war for generations. It was harder work than trapping beaver had ever been. But it was better work, work that mattered, work that Mary would have been proud of. Ayana became a voice for her people in a world that was changing faster than anyone could have predicted. She spoke at territorial meetings. She wrote letters to newspapers. She never forgot who she was or where she came from. But she also never stopped looking forward, never stopped imagining a future where her people could thrive instead of merely survive. And through it all, through the hard days and the victories and the setbacks and the small daily joys of life, they had each other. Not as savior and saved, not as white man and Apache woman, but as partners, as equals, as two souls who had looked into the darkness and decided that light was worth fighting for. The silver dollar remained above their door for the rest of their lives, weathering sun and rain and snow, but never falling. Children who visited would ask about it, and Ayana or Jonah would tell them the story. Not the whole story, that would take too long, but enough of the story to teach the lesson. That freedom is not free, that justice requires courage, that love can exist between the most unlikely people if both are willing to see past the walls that separate them, that sometimes the best investment you can make is in another human being, even when that human being comes from a world completely different from your own. Years later, when both Jonah and Ayana had long since passed into memory and their cabin had become a historical site that school children visited on field trips, someone asked Red Skywalker, who lived to be 93 years old, what the most important thing was that he had learned from knowing them. The old colonel thought for a long time before answering. Finally, he said, "They taught me that the greatest courage is not found on the battlefield. It is found in the daily choice to do what is right even when it is hard, even when it costs you, even when no one is watching." Jonah could have walked away. Ayana could have given up. They could have chosen bitterness and revenge. They chose something better. They chose to build instead of destroy. That is the lesson. That is the legacy. And if we are wise, that is what we will remember when the stories have faded and the legends have been written and rewritten so many times that no one can recall what was real and what was imagined. The truth is simple. Love conquered hate, courage conquered fear, hope conquered despair. And two people who should have been enemies became the best parts of each other. That is the only story that matters. That is the story worth telling. And above the door of that little cabin on the border between two worlds, a silver dollar still gleams, catching the sunlight, reminding everyone who passes that sometimes the smallest investment can yield the greatest return. $1 bought a life, but what that life built, well, that was priceless. That was forever.